allow people to join in. I know I just printed out a bunch of workbooks not too long ago, and and I got a good price on them, but $4 a pop, that's pretty good for any. How many pages is that?
I think it's like 100
Oh wow.
or 81. It's got blank pages in the back.
Wow,
So,
that's 81
um,
pages. That's pretty good. $4. Jeez.
yeah, because sometimes it's like if you're doing like an event or a conference, you've got here's your book and your pen and your official merch, and everybody wants like a thing to write in. And I know like digital's cool and virtual's cool, but man, when you're like somewhere and you want to write notes, nothing beats a good like notebook
Yeah.
journal kind of thing. So
Yeah, it's true.
And
I
we've
don't
had,
think I was just going to say, I mean, I don't think we're at the point where digital is a little distracting when it comes to writing, it's for me anyway. I mean, there may be others that are better at it, or just writing period stuff.
right.
unless you have your phone in airplane mode, then yeah, you can see all the other things coming in. But we had Karen Lubin has been on the podcast, been on the People Strategy Forum a few times, and she was just actually talking about like neurologically what happens when you put a pen to paper and like what it does in your brain and stuff, and how that's different than just like doing voice to text in your phone or because like I used my phone for my to-do list and stuff like that, and how different it is to actually write it down and the journal, like she's talking about journaling. And so it's pretty something there that we don't want to totally get rid of.
In my hard copy journal, I can remember things I wrote years ago, including like ideas, even some of these book ideas that I sketched out in my journal. I can see it on the left side of the page. There's a bunch of lines, and then it's up in the top left. But things in my Evernote, which is just massive amounts of meeting notes, it is just text to me. I can't see anything in Evernote. It's just gobs of links. But in my journal, I can see it crystal clear. So you're right. There's definitely like a visual like way that we catalog things differently. But I just like to get smudges on my hands. It's like I wrote that. Now it means something more than Microsoft Word and Chat GPT doing it for me. So
yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. It's I think there's something about letting your brain flow and be able to get into that flow state with a pen that you maybe can't get into with with your fingers or with whatever. So I think that's my experience in my current journaling practice. Like you said, just the circles and the lines and the stars and the all of that you wouldn't get if you're just doing it like linearly on a computer.
Linearly.
I had
that's hard. Now we're all tricked up on that one.
Linearly.
Hey, Howard just joined. Howard just joined us.
Hey,
Howard.
Greetings.
Hello.
Oh well, we're almost to the top of the hour already.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and we'll get things going. So I'm going to just bring up our screen here, and we'll give another minute or so before we start, and then I'll go through the introduction here.
Great. Yeah. Apologies in advance for not wearing my signature orange shirt. It's just like dry cleaning and schedules and calendars, end of the school year. So apologies in advance for those of you hoping to see the orange shirt on today's call.
John, you're just you're rebranding. That's what you're doing.
Thank you, Howard. That's exactly right. This was a test. You have won 5 gold stars. Yeah, it's so funny. Once I
showing us what not to do when you're creating your brand.
That's right. I like really bright colored
10 gold shirts.
10 gold shirts. I have bought the same dress shirt. I have some hot pink shirts that I wear too, and I bought 2 of them, and I bought the second one and I brought it to the dry cleaners and like, I just bought this shirt, and the shirt I was picking up was that shirt. And I was like, man, I don't know what that says about me. But clearly I have a penchant for hot pink shirts, but I kept them both. So what are you going to do?
That's that flash, right? For sure. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to start the streaming service. Here we go. Getting things kicked off here. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the People Strategy Forum podcast. We're a show that guides leaders on evaluating the overall workforce to kind of elevate it. And we believe that people are the heart of successful organizations. And team members' well-being, their rewards, their career development is essential to ensuring that you really have that healthy, engaged workplace. So this show discusses the practical and effective leadership strategies for top executives, senior professionals, and talent managers overall. So that's what we're all about. I mean, one thing that you need to know about the People Strategy Forum is right now we are live on the Zoom platform, but you may be listening to this on one of our multicasts. It could be LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. You can find us on all those channels and be able to consume this content as you'd like. But it's also important to know that after a couple of weeks, this all gets released to our podcast, and you'll be able to find it out there on the podcast as well. All right, so talking about our host, and Sumit just joined us, very, very timely, Sumit. Hello. So Sumit Singla is an experienced HR consultant, and he's dedicated to helping small and medium-sized enterprises scale up globally with cutting edge and those important solutions, especially when we're thinking about going across those different countries. Sumit is a wealth of knowledge in that area. He's worked with top firms like Accenture and Deloitte and Aon and GE. So Sumit just brings this wealth of knowledge that we love having him on the show. Also, we have Howard Nisewitz. Howard, you'll find he is a crusader in ensuring that we're breaking the spreadsheet bond. And so a lot of compensation consultants out there are over reliant on these outdated systems and making sure that we're bringing in those top technologies that help us enhance our game is super important. And Howard is a leader in going through that metamorphosis. He's not only an excellent comp practitioner, but also is an expert in HR overall. And then, of course, we have Wendy Graham. Wendy is the founder of Octopus 8 Consulting, and she's a dynamic learning and development and communications expert. She is certified in the TMA method and helps companies integrate those important talent processes into their fold. And I'm Sam Reeve. I'm the founder of Comp Team, and I'm a global compensation and talent management strategist. I help companies put in that critical infrastructure that helps them grow and scale, whether it's in compensation or in talent management. All right. Now our special guest today, we're going to be talking about personal branding for employee engagement and retention. And today I have the privilege of hosting Jon Barnes. He's a true Renaissance man with has lots of diverse experiences that are in invaluable lessons that have shaped his unique perspective on life and work. From Germany to being an Eagle Scout to automotive design school and sitting in a Lamborghini, which we need to talk about, Jon. I'd love to hear the story behind all these things. Jon's journey has been filled with extraordinary opportunities, and he dedicates his life to bringing people together and inspiring them through storytelling, with roles spanning from marketing leader to writer to coach and more. Jon empowers individuals to turn their dreams into reality. So without further ado, Jon, I would just love to learn a little bit more about, how you came to be with us today, your passion and personal branding, and why you wrote the book of Brand Thyself and the other books that you have in play. I know you even have a workbook that you've kind of are helping, you just put together. I'd like to hear all about that. So tell us about yourself, Jon.
Sure. No, thanks, Sam. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me on. And man, wow, what a lofty write-up. Goodness, I hope we can pay it off today. So no, as Sam mentioned, I feel sometimes it is hard because my story is so strange in terms of the path that I've taken to what I'm doing now, that maybe it just helps to start from level zero a little bit, because a lot of what flows out of my books is really an extension of just my story to help others have some tools in their toolbox and have the vernacular to create their personal brand, even if your path to get where you are is a little like this. And the more I share my story, the more I find, you know what, there's a lot of people out there that you're a CFO, but you didn't go to school for finance. You're you're a professional musician, but you never took a music class in your life. I'm finding folks all over the place that are living in that world. And I think, I just have a real desire to help, especially a lot of younger professionals who are like, oh my gosh, I'm a computer science major, but I want to get into ceramics, or I'm in international finance, but I just graduated and I have zero interest. What do I do now? And I feel like my story can help a little bit in terms of it's kind of showcasing how I made it through that wacky path and what I'm doing now. And long story short, I only had one thing I wanted to do as a career from the youngest memories I have, and it was be a car designer. Automotive design was the only thing I ever thought I would do. And every piece of paper I ever had as a kid growing up, it's all filled with cars. And it's like the only thing I ever did. There's not a ton of opportunities to do that. There's only a couple schools in the country that have a great transportation design program. And ultimately in the field, there's more NBA players than car designers. So it's not like a huge field where a lot of people can do, a lot of that external transportation design. So I kind of went into it, no plan B, no second choice. I had one school, one major, and that was it. And I got in, I got accepted, I get to school. And I think there's a lot of people out there that have this sort of experience as well, that once you get into it as your main thing, you have a light bulb moment you weren't expecting. And this light bulb moment rocked my world. And just a couple months in, having a great time, getting into it, doing all the, cool car design stuff. But I had this revelation, like, Jon, like, your gift isn't cars, it's creativity. Creativity is the real thing that you're good at. Cars is just the way it expresses itself. And when you're early, adult, that sort of self-revelation is that's a first, and it's a mind blower. And I was sort of figuring out, like, what do I do now? I just got into like Harvard for car design. Am I supposed to keep going and do this? Like, I don't feel like this revelation is something that's going to make me like, yeah, let's do med school for car design for the rest of my life. And I just couldn't do it. I just didn't feel right to continue on the path with that knowledge. So I finished my year, and just telling people I wasn't coming back, you could see people had no idea. Like, Jon, this is the only thing everyone has ever thought you were going to do, is be a car designer. What are you doing? So I sort of came back and reset. And from there on out, the story was basically through that process of self-discovery, I felt open to any career path, because being creative can be applied to any career path. But at the same time, it's sort of like professional agoraphobia. If you can do anything, you feel like I can't do anything. So through a variety of life experiences, I got into full-time ministry. I was, leading youth groups at church. That was something that no one expected from the car design to ministry transition. None of my art credits transferred to that degree. Fun fact, I also started my own business doing, website design, creative, all of those sort of things. I worked at a law firm, being the creative edge for FDA, USDA regulatory law practice, not something a lot of people are into these days. I worked at a creative agency, went back to doing my own thing. So through all of these sort of steps, each time that I felt like I had to make a decision, or that there was a change coming, I sort of looked to that initial revelation about myself, which is, if my real gift is creativity, creative communication, where could I apply that? And maybe there's not like a right and wrong, there's just a next. And through that process, I realized there's a lot of people out there, especially younger professionals, who struggle with that idea, and they keep looking for, what am I supposed to do next? What if this thing doesn't work out? They're waiting for guidance or a plan or a map. And sometimes it's like, you just take the step, and where you land is the correct place, but you got to have some sort of tools in your tool belt just to think about your own life and your next steps. So that's where it all began, Sam, with my first book, this Creative Threads. And I titled it that because, looking backwards in my own life, I found the creative thread that wove through all of these wacky careers I just mentioned was creative communication. And from there, and whatever I do in the future, that's still the thread that weaves through all of them. Years later, my new book is really written for an older audience. It's called Brand Thyself, which I think is more what we're talking about today. But Brand Thyself was sort of a 2.0 version, where I had a lot of people whose parents were buying creative threads, but they were buying them for their college students. But then they were reading them. They were like, Jon, this is good stuff. Give me some of this but for like grownups. So I retooled a lot of what was in creative threads, but wrote it from the perspective of personal branding as sort of not just a buzzword, right? It's pretty buzzy right now, personal branding, right? Everybody knows somebody that's doing something like that. But as a tool in your professional toolbox, personal branding actually is an essential strategy to where we are now for your own advancement. And for leaders, it's essential to helping unlock employee engagement and retention. It is the tool in the toolbox to help people stay longer, do better, and grow farther in your current organization. So the book lands somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's what I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years.
Well, it's such a great story, and I think it's extremely timely, especially right now. I mean, if we just think about what's going on in the world and how the world is changing at an ever increasing rate. So I mean, it could be that right now we intend to go into a certain career, and 3, 4, 5 years from now, or maybe 2 years from now, that career is changed significantly, or maybe doesn't even exist anymore, is gone to develop into something else. And so when we're talking about branding, I think it seems like we should be creating brands that are going to be resilient. That's more about what we stand for and so forth, no matter what we're doing in life. What are your thoughts around that?
That's a great question. And I think it first makes sense to help level set on what I mean by personal brand, because a lot of people hear that and they're like, I don't want to be like TikTok dancing, making Instagram video. I don't need a logo, John. I'm CFO of like some 1,000-person firm. I do not need a logo for myself. Like, how narcissistic do you think I am, right? So look, I get that. When I say personal brand, I don't mean a lot of the marketing exterior execution items. I mean a storytelling framework for yourself and how you relate to your key audiences, right? How are you unique and convey unique value to whoever it is that you lead? How does that unique leadership shake out for your customers or your audience? And then there's usually another audience too that you have that's either personal or professional. Usually everyone has 3 distinct audiences at least that they need to craft and shape their perception about in a strategic way. Personal branding, to me, I'm going to define it as getting in front of, having a plan, and being strategic about how you shape perception through an ongoing drumbeat of storytelling. So that's the flashy way to say, hey, if you're on this, you're listening right now and you're like, John, I don't want to make a logo and dance on camera. It's totally fine. I think there's very few people I work with for whom that is applicable. But for everybody else, I think you're already sensing too that with a lot of the transparency about corporate culture, corporate institutions, people behind them, initiatives and activities, what's stated in annual reports versus what shows up on social media. There's a fading opacity around corporate infrastructure from the public or the audience perspective, where personal brands, real individual and real people, you are sort of the star now. And I know a lot of people say it's always been that way, but now it's becoming more, away from just, hey, what makes us different is our people, right? Which everyone says. And more so like, what makes us different is Jerry or Sarah or whoever, right? It's like the real people, real faces. So part of what I'm trying to do to help, especially senior leaders, is you've got to be out there as the face of, and you can't hide behind or rely on the corporate brand anymore. All the odds are stacked against you from relying on the activities, your corporate comms team, your social media team. Like, they're doing great. Keep them. All right. Shout out social media teams. I'm in there with you. But it's not just enough to have this steady pipeline of brand content coming out. Now, personal brands, and you as the leader, as an influencer, as a stakeholder for your organization, you've got to take some of those marketing activities and toolbox and strategy and apply those to yourself. So I think it's both a nature of where we are, just in terms of how a lot of marketing, social media, and perception has opened the visibility for organizations beyond the official corporate comms side of things. But it's also to your benefit as a leader, because the long-term, like, who knew a year ago that ChatGPT Whisper was going to be a job role right now that could clock a couple $100,000 as a W-2 hire? No one saw that coming, right? So your ability to be agile with your own role, even if it's you driven by a personal change, like you wake up and you're like, I'm bored with finance, time to get into skydiving. Like, I don't know what you're going to do, but being someone that's up to date and ready to go with your personal brand so that you can convey your personal value prop, regardless of the career change you're going to make. That's step one. The second part is just being change and agility ready, just being ready to embrace change. So it's not caught off guard. And you're like, hey guys, we got to get all the leaders together for a personal brand kickoff meeting. I've scheduled it for 5 months from now. And by Q2 2026, we want to be ready to launch. Man, sorry, that's total failure, right? It's about quick wins, fast launches, and agile change. That's the mode that is the new era that we're in now. And your personal brand is this, you've got to own a chunk of it yourself, can't outsource it all to your marketing and social teams.
Well, that's a great point, because there's a lot of companies right now that manage their executives' social media presence in some aspects. And so what do you have to say to those executives to ensure that the true them is coming out and it's not just the company line?
Yeah, and props to all the folks handling corporate comms and socials for your senior leaderships and your C-suite. I know what that's like, and you're on the front lines. Like, keep doing it. I think the real challenge that I've seen is twofold from the C-suite. One is, and I think I'm just blessed to know a lot of really great leaders, they're too humble and they're like, I don't want to be out front. I want my people to shine. I'm like, yes, that is correct. However, your title and your position in the organization, even as an enabler of awesomeness to the workforce, you are still by default have to be a high visibility person. And just because you're humble doesn't mean you can't be visible. And I think that's step one, is helping people in that senior leadership role see that it's not narcissistic or self-aggrandizing to put yourself out there in a strategic way, because a lot of the themes that leaders are going to hit is how you get the best out of others, how you equip and set them up to do their best work, and the success stories that come from helping great leaders create great leaders, right? So that's the first thing. I think there's always some reticence, that there's a perception about, look, you get on LinkedIn, there's that one person, you know who I'm talking about. Every 4 hours they're on there and they're like, I did this, I did this, I did this. Everybody knows that person, right? Maybe it's me. I don't know. I hope it's not me. But there's a fear, there's a reticence that I don't want to be that like person that's always on LinkedIn that everyone's tired about hearing of and that just keeps talking about themselves. We're all on the same page there, but you've got to be out there and got to be visible. That's the first one. So be humble, but be visible, I think, is step one. The second is a really good team that's running the senior leadership's corporate comms, social, personal brand. They're going to work with you to develop a few key content buckets. And that's the good part, is a lot of people, when they think about being out there with their brand, they just don't know what they're going to do. So there's this sort of fear, like texting a selfie of lunch, be like, I'm having a grilled cheese sandwich. Like, yes, we're not going to do that, right? Unless you're in the grilled cheese sandwich space. Applicable for you, but what your team's going to do, or what a great in-house or external social media or personal brand team is going to do, they're going to work with you to figure out what's your unique value prop as a leader. What can you do or say that no one else can, and how does that translate into value, success, and outcomes for your three key audiences: the people you lead, the people they lead, and your end user or your customer. From there, you're going to figure out what your content buckets are. Most great personal brands only talk about 3 or 4 things, and they only have 10 stories. They just say them over and over again in a compelling way, right? If you take anyone that you see on LinkedIn who's like level 10 killing it, if you take a look at all of their posts and then reverse engineer the things that they're talking about, they only have 3 or 4 things they talk about, and they only have 10 stories. I'm telling you, they only have 10 stories. They just repackage it in a different way. If you want to see a great example of this, is go check out New York City realtor Ryan Serhant. Go through his posts. He's posting constantly. Great video, good stuff. But you'll see that his posts are the same story. One's a video, one's a write-up, one's a bunch of bullet points, one's a selfie, one's a story like it was 3 o'clock on a Friday. Another one is a science post, right? So that's the first thing. It's like, don't worry, you don't have to start from level 0 with your content, but you've got to have a content plan, a unique personal value prop, and you got to have execution support, because a personal brand isn't like one and done. Like, I made this LinkedIn header and here's a great picture of me with an orange shirt, right? Like, that is not your personal brand. The personal brand is your ongoing, is the perception you shape through an ongoing series of storytelling. That's where the content comes in. That's where the repetition comes in. And that's where you pull in some of that, expertise from your marketing or your comms teams, right? You don't have to do the doing of all that, but you need to be ready as leaders and as enablers of leaders, especially if your whole senior leadership team just drank the Kool-Aid on personal brand. You're like, guys, we got to do this. Jon Barnes is right. Then you've got to make sure that you've got a plan in place so that you have content going out that's the right content that hits all the notes. And there's a question in the chat. This is a great one. Repetitive content, is that not a validation of authenticity? I want to differentiate between content repurposing as just a efficiency of marketing output, and just repeat content. When I say there's 10 stories and 3 themes, I'm saying that if you have a story or something that happened or a key theme that you really want to hit, you can execute to it to have your marketing team repurpose it to not necessarily say the same thing, but repackage it in different ways. Marketing team will know how to do that so that you don't have 3 weeks between posts. But you also don't want to, on the other side is a great point. You don't want to post every 3 hours the exact same thing and just like make a different graphic for it. So I think it's a sweet spot. But if you're not a marketing leader, lean on the quality team that you have. Just make sure that they're following that sort of process, because you don't want to be necessarily a real estate influencer like Ryan Serhant, unless that's your space. There's a form function that's going to match to wherever you are and whoever you want to market to. But you got to have a plan. You got to know how you're different. You got to be ready to be out there. And to all leaders who are getting ready to start, don't worry. The first couple things you post, you're going to hate them no matter what. So that's the great news. Like, don't worry. Everybody I've ever worked with, the first couple ones, they were like, I'm not sure. Oh, I don't really like it. Like, forget about it. They're 2 humble leaders. They're just nervous. We got them over the hump. Everybody eases through it. So don't worry. You're not going to like the first few, but it's less about getting that perfect post and more so about reinforcing groove in your world. That's the type of themes and the type of stories you want to tell. So I hope that's helpful so far.
That's great. And you mentioned about a bunch of different things, doing a video, doing, a bulleted list, telling a story, these types of different approaches. Is it important to have that mix in place of how we engage in as a leader?
I think, and look, for a lot of folks who are here in the executive C-suite, I'm mostly talking about LinkedIn as a place to do this. It doesn't have to just be LinkedIn and doesn't have to just be leaderships. In fact, a big part of what we want to talk about is how to mobilize this idea within your workforce for everybody so they connect their retention with their personal brand in your organization. But I would say, like, don't worry about too much about in the weeds. Just be ready to support this initiative good 3 to 6 months, knowing that you're going to not love the first couple things you do. You're going to be nervous. If you're at least 80%, 70% like okay with what's going out, or like if the rest is nerves and the rest is confidence, that's all you need to be. You're not going to be 100% ready to go with everything, which is fine. But I would say it's more important to have a consistent ongoing activity strategy that improves over time than to only post here and there and make it just the greatest video that you show your grandchildren years and years from now. Forget about perfection in your ongoing plan. Focus on repetition and reinforcement, your key themes, your key differentiators. And a challenge I tell people too, because I put the workbook together and I turn these into some exercises, and I'll tell leaders, like, fill in the blanks. And I give them a couple prompts, like, I'm here to do what, for who, because why, right? Like, fill in some of these blanks. And then when they're done, I say, can you erase your name and put someone else's name there? Would it still make sense? And if it does, it's not specific enough. You haven't captured your unique value prop. Like, anybody else met the car designer turned youth ministry worker / entrepreneur law firm worker who wrote a book on personal branding? I think I'm the only one, at least that I found, right? Maybe there's others out there, but for me, like, that's a way that I've crafted my personal background story in a way where only I can say it. So I challenge people too, when you're doing this on your leadership retreats, your offsites, and you're like, guys, what is our brand about in the next year? How do we really translate value to our end users? If you write your brand's, your company's mission statement, value statement, if you can erase your company's name and put someone else's, same thing. It's not distinct enough. You haven't captured your unique selling proposition in a way that's 100% distinct to you. And that's the hardest, most grueling part. From there, once you kind of have those raw materials, those building blocks, then your marketing folks come in, your execution folks, and they get in a room, they got notebooks and their phones and everything, and they're like, all right, let's make some stuff. But you got to lay that really hard foundational work of figuring out how you're unique, how that value translates, and get those firm building blocks. Once those in place, the more you do, the faster you'll go, and the more you'll like it.
Jon, how do you know if it's working, or it doesn't matter? If it's true to you, does it matter what impact it's having?
Yeah, great question, Howard. I think it's perfect. I think it's a great question to ask in the beginning with your team is, what does ROI look like for this? And in my book, I go through a few different ROI models. One is strictly financial. If you're like an individual entrepreneur, an individual consultant, usually it's ROI based. I want to get more sales, make more money, sell more things. A lot of times at the very top of the C-suite, it is not an ROI measurement from a financial perspective. It is a shaping of influence and a sense of connection. It's a desire to connect. I have a lot of organizations who they have very senior leadership and a very young entry-level workforce, and there's a huge gap in the middle. And their desire for extra with their personal brand is to just increase connection. And your team's got to figure out how to measure that. From the executable related to LinkedIn, content, optional opportunities to engage in the workforce, there's usually 5 to 7 metrics you can put in place that some of them measure. Like, for example, I always tell people your LinkedIn engagements, total comments, visibility and growth, social selling index score. Those are all things that you can measure right off your LinkedIn and just have something in place, right? If you don't have 10 people on your team to like work like you, that's a start. If it's something that's more influence and connection, you need to bring in your people folks and figure out like, how are we measuring connection? I think you've got retention, engagement factors. Gallup Workplace has a really great employee engagement measurement matrix. You could pull some stuff out of that and create your own framework. But that's a great question. It's important to know before you begin what you're measuring. And I have a lot of folks that started with influence and ended at finance. A lot of other folks that started at financial measurement and ended at influence. So as long as you're keeping track of it, because make no joke, it's work. It is definitely work. And after the fun stuff wears off and you've bought your ring lights and your selfie sticks and all that, like at some point in month 2, and you're like, oh, it's July 4th weekend. I don't want to write this. I don't have my team write this. Man, you got to push through that part and keep it consistent, because that's where you're going to hit plateau. All the numbers are going to look like that at some point. But that's a great question. Figure out what you're measuring. Don't have more than 5 to 7 metrics, and task somebody with measuring some of those. Don't do it all yourself. Loop in your team strategically to create a framework. If you're doing it for your leadership team or middle management, make it a contest, gamify it a little bit, and see who can out brand. Have some sort of metrics in place so that you can competition around some of the activities. Usually is a healthy thing. And usually leaders love to compete against other leaders to win. So let's see. Did that help?
Yes.
Good. What about, the different demographics? We talked about LinkedIn a lot, and some people use LinkedIn, some people don't. Certain age groups may use different things. What do we do? How are the different demographics consuming this, and how do we apply to each of those? Because of our teammates, we have a lot of different age groups that we need to apply to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And personal branding can mean different things to different people. So I think if you're in the C-suite looking to influence and connect with a large workforce or parallel to partners and stakeholders, I think you're doing a lot of the same things at some point, but you're in a different neighborhood of measurement and activity than maybe folks who are 27 looking to pivot from, an international finance major to starting their own business, for example. So I see a lot of folks who are maybe thinking about going solo, taking their side hustle full time. They don't have a 1,000-person workforce and a corporate comms team, right? It's just them. And maybe they're entrepreneurs, startups, or they're a very small team looking to simply get out there and invest. I don't think there's like a real universal playbook for each of, for everyone, but I think some of the common ingredients usually are the same, which is figuring out what you need to measure, what success looks like, what your home base is, or wherever your nexus lives, content program, and some ability to measure your content creation activities, which is almost always part of it. I think you can have personal brand influence and actions without a heavy content investment, but it usually means you're on stage somewhere quite a bit. So there's some sort of visibility increase. Sometimes too, I'll work with a lot of folks who are already out there. They're doing stuff, they're on stages, and I see them on LinkedIn all the time. They're just not, they haven't pulled it together into a plan, and they haven't each channel that they're on. For example, a lot of folks, when they go to conference, they'll put up their PowerPoint, but they haven't put on their social links. It's not branded for them. It's just sort of like generic template or the corporate template. They don't have a hashtag that they're doing. They don't have a little QR code where if you want to download this presentation, you take a picture, it gets your email address, it goes into the system. So they haven't taken some of those marketing playbook stuff and applied it to their personal brand activities. Other times I have leaders who are just, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They don't need to watch this whole hour. All they need to do is pick 3 things and take them from a 1 to a 3. And usually those things are using LinkedIn a little bit more strategically, investing in some sort of content plan, and better leveraging the places that they're speaking to complement their virtual, their online activities. So sometimes I have folks starting from level 0. They need everything, including the brand. They do need a personal logo for themselves. They have no website, no plan, no content, no video. They need the works. Other times I have folks who are just like, they only need 1 or 2 things. They just need to be strategic, line them up, and just hit it over and over and over again. And that is success for them. So it's a very broad breadth of what you might end up doing and how you might measure it. But I think you got to work backwards from your use case. What does success look like? What do I want to happen?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. Being consistent is a big deal, right? So, but sometimes there's those leaders out there, and there's the safe place, and then there's the not so safe place, right? Being safe means that you're not taking sides. You're not being offensive. You're being careful in what you're saying and so forth. But then there's that other rule of thought that's saying, hey, if you want to be noticed, you have to take a side. You have to, speak the truth to that particular point. What is your advice there? I mean, is those 2 lines of thought there?
Here's my quasi-scientific reverse engineering of what LinkedIn values and amplifies in its platform as a signal of how everything amplifies voices in the business marketplace. LinkedIn wants you to be authentic and to use words of vulnerability, emotion. It wants you to speak first person, and it doesn't care about your consummate professional, value added, blah, blah, corporate speak. It wants to hear you sharing real struggles, real wins. It knows when you're sharing words of emotion and vulnerability. I don't think they have to be political necessarily, but LinkedIn wants you to showcase the you behind the corporate you. And more than ever, it is focused on amplifying voices of authenticity and vulnerability. So the first litmus test, as you think about what kind of content you produce and how your presence on LinkedIn is perceived, is it mostly promotions, like sign up here for this webinar, click here for the blah blah white paper, blah blah blog post, or are you using emotion words? Are you using storytelling words? And are you naming real people, places, and things in the universe, right? So those are all things that immediately signal, like, what is the sea of content over the last few months that I'm producing on LinkedIn. Other folks that do much, they just like, I tell people it's the thumb, right? They're going through, they like a bunch of stuff and they say, congrats, kudos, great job, which is good. That's something, right? It's just like for LinkedIn's quality signals, that's step 1, make sure you're doing that stuff. But at the level 10 of LinkedIn use is an ongoing, consistent personal storytelling. And LinkedIn just knows if you're promoting a download or a webinar versus sharing a personal anecdote, story, selfie. It wants your group shots and selfies, doesn't want your stock photo, doesn't want someone writing the word innovation on a chalkboard. It doesn't want any of that stuff. It wants a picture of you on a screen just like this, taking a selfie at a conference, you and your friends at the bar talking about work-life balance. That's what LinkedIn, the balance that it is situating itself, where it's not, a lot of people on LinkedIn, it's like, this isn't Facebook. It's like, hey man, this is the new LinkedIn. And it is a more transparent platform of leadership vulnerability, not just resume posting or promotion of corporate comms, corporate whatever. So I think that's the first thing, is like, are you ready to extend yourself and be vulnerable a little bit more than you have? And from there, you can figure out, is it personal stories of leadership? In the workbook, I've got like 30 prompts to help people figure out what are political and non-controversial ways to storytell things about your own life that are professional yet personal. For example, tell us about a time when you failed in business or an initiative. Tell us about a lesson you had to learn the hard way. What advice would you give to your younger professional self? What are 3 ways that this? So all of these prompts help you sort of sum up like, what's a leadership lesson or a life lesson that correlates to business, that's got some personal splashes of experience, but that when I sit down to write it, it's not like writing your Q3 report or your annual report, right? It doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, here's page 87 of the blah, blah, whatever index. This is like me and my life. It's a little autobiographical. That's what I would say is the best thing to do first, is if that's not the headspace you're in, take a look on LinkedIn of folks that you see who are in your space that maybe are doing a good job of that's not freaking you out right now. Because a lot of what I'm saying, I think a lot of leaders, they're like, nope, I'm not posting pictures of me on my boat with my dog. I'm not doing selfies. I'm not doing any of that. Well, you got to find a way to get yourself out there a little more. And it can't just be stock photos and downloads. You got to write something about your own life and experiences. So, I also find a lot of leaders, especially those in the C-suite who are very tenured, they've got a book they're just dying to write. I don't know if they've written a Brand Thyself like this, but they have a book in them. And I get into these conversations and I realize, like, if you didn't have to just completely grind on all the problems right now, you could take a month off. I know you could write a book and it would be good. Dig into that. What's that book about? And from there, I've had some folks, it was cookbooks, other folks, it's leadership books, other folks, it's kind of life lessons from sailing, whatever it is, there's stories in there that you can pull from. It doesn't have to be hardcore 10 lessons I learned from Harvard's MBA program. Like, it doesn't need to be that, but it needs to be intimate, transparent, authentic, and personal. And you can ask ChatGPT to help you, right? You write a little something, say, hey, ChatGPT, help me make this more personal and intimate, all right? And let it help you, or let your corporate comms team help you. But got to get out there a little bit more, got to be personal. Step 1.
Yeah, it's so so important. I mean, I think the big theme right now is to be more human, right? And especially with your people, with your customers, and so forth. Really showing yourself. But frankly, I mean, I grew up in a different professional life where you weren't supposed to bring your personal life to work and so forth. And I know there's been a lot of changes over time in this past 10 years. But Sumit, I would be interested to hear from you, just from a multicultural perspective. Do you see different perspectives in how people use LinkedIn, or how comfortable they are in putting their own lives on LinkedIn?
That's an interesting question, Sam. And I think the way people have been using LinkedIn is changing. It's still only about skimming the surface, where a lot of people seem to be following the advice that it's good to turn up, and they're just posting disconnected aspects of their lives on LinkedIn without weaving into a story, or without using the 10 stories that John was talking about. So it could be something as random as, I went to the airport, this is what happened to me today, and so I'm happy, upset, or I missed breakfast, and so on. And a lot of the content is actually without a plan. Second aspect I've started observing is that, and I don't know what's John's view on this, there are a lot of personal branding content, or a lot of content on LinkedIn just goes, me, I did this, I am so phenomenal, come buy something from me. And I think that's just annoying. So if you look at any of the good ads on TV, none of them really say, come buy from us. They don't even actively ask you to buy. They just tell you a story. They tell you a story that you can relate to, whether it's an ad for, let's say, a detergent, or an ad for beer, or an ad for a restaurant chain. And I think that's where we are probably missing the point. The idea of LinkedIn is not to brag, but I think a lot of people are getting on to the platform and starting to write, create content, but it's not in the right, it doesn't have the right messaging to appeal to their audiences. And I'd be very curious to hear what John has to say about this.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the mistake made there is that volume of production does not equal connection or strategy, right? And man, I'll tell you what, I've got 5 kids. You know, I got a lot going on over here. Efficiency is what matters to me everywhere, right? Like if I have 8 minutes to feed all my kids and get out the door, it's going to be a very productive 8 minutes. And I think that's the way to think about a lot of your content too, is like, is your volume just to have volume, or are you making the most of that? And there's a great matrix I heard of from an author, Jon Vroman, who I'm pretty sure took it from someone else. So credit to whoever's this is, but it's sort of like not everyone absorbs value in the same way. And you're not going to resonate with everyone in the same way, but there's 4 buckets you could consider. Hey, how is something I know or of value, how does that translate to usefulness for someone else? And the 4 steps, the 4 options are steps, silliness, struggles, hold on, I'm forgetting the steps, silliness, struggles, science are the 4. Props to Jon Vroman. I don't know if you're on this call, but these are different ways, and you'll know them because you know a lot of people who all they do articles like Life Hacker, 4 tips to that, 4 steps to that, 5 ways to this, 10 links to that. That's all they do. And they love that stuff. It's really useful to them because they like to open, scan it, and just get that whatever knowledge that is from you. Other folks, they're more narrative. They want to hear the struggle story. They love the movie Rocky. They love sports movies, underdog movies, and they love a post that starts with the score was 87-12. It was raining. I stood on the sports metaphor. I don't know. That's not my thing, but you know what I mean? It's like they love struggle stories that sort of capture and lure you in to a life lesson or a payoff. Other times, you know who I'm talking about, your spreadsheet people, they love science. 38% of that, 6 out of 10 that, 9 out of 10 doctors that. They love the science part of it. They want something that comes from a Gardner report, the Census Bureau. They just love something that ends with dash whatever, you know, the resource is. And they love stuff that's science-based. They don't care about your story or your sports metaphors. They're like, give me the numbers, right? And then the last one is silliness. Some people just love to have a good time, and they love your meme, they love your hilarious story, and they actually do care about your dog walking and your dog barked, and it turned out it was actually Danny DeVito at the park and you took a funny picture. Like, that could be great for them. They'll talk about it for weeks. But your CFO, he's not talking about that at all. He doesn't care about your Danny DeVito story. He's really interested in your Gardner report statistics thing. So I think that's part of it, is when you get into it, you've got your story buckets, your unique value prop, is you room to test some things. Now, to your point, it should be useful for whoever it is, but you can try a different container for how you transmit that usefulness, knowing that not everyone's going to find your silly story funny. Not everyone's going to love your 5 tips or your 3 steps, and not everyone's going to read your huge write-up of, you know, your touch Super Bowl or whatever. So I think you've got a lot of options for how you want to do the storytelling. Just make sure you test some different things, and you'll find your audience responds to different things. I've got a selfie of me at a car show with a little write-up. It did great. People loved it. It was like one of my most popular things on LinkedIn last year. Then I did this really great post on ways to prepare your marketing budget for the next year, and like 2 people like was my wife, right? And like no one cared about it. And I was like, this post is great. Are you kidding me? What a valuable piece of information, Jon Barnes. How to prepare your marketing budget, 10 steps. No one cared, but people love that selfie show. So I didn't know that. And you just got to try stuff. So I think as long as you're generally in the strategic neighborhood, you got your storytelling buckets, and over time, even if you're over here sometimes and over here sometimes, if it all generally is marching in the same direction for the storytelling framework and the perception you want to reinforce, just keep going. Just keep going. You'll find what resonates the most, and you'll find the stuff that you think is great no one in your audience cares about. So just stop doing it.
All right, so I'm all for that. I mean, I love the sense of bringing some humility, some silliness, and so forth into the conversation. But sometimes when you're talking to one of your people, your employees, or even some clients, I mean, something doesn't come off right. It comes off as offensive. What are the steps that we take when something like that happens?
Yeah, I mean, first thing to do with if you are someone who's part of a team, you got to figure out like where did this go wrong? Who's the voices in this mix? Was it something like, did you go rogue? And a lot of times the problem with what you said is that you went rogue and no one else looked at it, and you had no other voices of wisdom or input or third-party vetting, and you took an emotional action to say something somewhere. A lot of times that's where leaders, go awry, and you did not do the groundwork of strategic communications, which is figuring out who's it for, what's the message, and what do we do. I think a lot of times on when it comes to your personal brand and the perception you're shaping with the connecting to an audience, you've got to lay a lot of groundwork over time to connect and build your reputation, not so that you're ready in case you do say something really dumb. You're like, oh man, I'm glad I laid a foundation. But I tell people your activities are sort of like over time, you're building up your credibility bank, right? And if you're the person that's out there posting your hamburger picture every day and you're on webinar, your self-promotions, your credibility bank, you're always taken out. But if you're someone that's investing, putting in, that's doing that hard work, that's producing value, that's giving, useful guidance and tips, or, your content buckets, you're filling your credibility bank up. You have a lot to withdraw, right? And I think that's a lot of times people come in, they go from cold turkey to, I'm just going to blast and write stuff 10 times a day. I heard Jon Barnes give this great webinar, and now for the rest of the week, I'm going to hammer LinkedIn. The binge process does not work for this, and you won't see any real value from it, no matter how great your content is. That ongoing, consistent drumbeat of useful content is where it's at, and your credibility bank is what you withdraw from or put into based on the sum total of your experiences. So I think the more eyes, the better. I think when you're starting out, that's a great place to now, if you're suddenly someone who is not externally visible in a certain channel, whether it's on stage or on LinkedIn or what have you, does not hurt to have some extra layers and some extra craftsmanship around what you're going to say and where you're going to say it. If you're someone that's very seasoned and very tenured and you just are really busy and now you need to get back to this and apply your effort, do what you have done before. Just look to work smarter, not harder, so you don't burn out.
Oh, I can't hear you, Sam.
Oh, can you hear me now? Perfect. Great. So I just want to take a brief pause here because I know we're having a lot of fun, but I want to bring up Vivian, our next week's speaker. She's going to be talking to us about diversity, equity, and inclusion with VR. Now, which is virtual reality for those that don't know what that acronym is, but the kind of the cool thing that just came out, I mean, there was a lot of new tech that was just released, and I know that new virtual reality goggles and augmented reality. And the cool thing that Vivian does is that she helps teach experiential learning in diversity, equity, and inclusion using virtual reality. So people are in the shoes, are able to go through the motions of how to respond appropriately and so forth. So we're going to learn about this new technique from Vivian next week on the People Strategy Forum. So join us there. But first of all, John, if you had to ask Vivian a question, and I know that we have this wonderful picture of Vivian here. If you're attending with us live, she has this beautiful purple and blue hair and a cultural dress and so forth. And so it's what would you ask Vivian about her personal branding?
Well, I was going to say the question I'd most want to hear from the VR experience is, how do different generations experience some self-discovery through that technology? You saw Apple's release this week or last couple of days about their AR headset and all this sort of thing. So I'm always intrigued, like, how do different generations experience personal change through technology, and what does that say about both the technology and the generational perceptions about it? That's what I'd be really interested to see over time, is what do you hear and what do you see as you take folks who are maybe very tenured C-suite, like lifer founders at organizations, versus someone that joined 3 weeks ago that graduated 6 months ago. What is that like?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, that's different in all these aspects. I mean, not just in how we deal with new technology, but in just the communication standards themselves. You were talking about in branding, it's different things are important to different generations, right? So as far as of the approach. And so as a leader where you have a diverse workforce of people of different ages and so forth, how do you choose the message in your branding that appeals to your workforce overall?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for putting the link to my book in. I know we're just kind of scraping the surface, and I think there's some folks that see a lot of this personal brand outflow as directly related to them and their career growth, And I think there's others that see it as directly related to them as a leader and shaper of culture at their organization. We're just scratching the surface. If it would help, you can even listen to me read the audiobook. So if you can handle this for like 2 hours, I'll read you the audiobook on Audible. It was really fun to record and a nightmare to export. But no, it's a great question. And I think part of the overall assumption here is that something big has changed in the last few years. COVID, virtual workforce, blah, blah. Don't call it anything specific, but you feel that change and it hasn't ended yet. And it's not going to end. It's continue to be shifty. And part of being a person that is a great leader is that you are able to absorb and strategize through change quickly and smartly, and that you can't take a year to make a decision about something. So I think part of the personal brand process about shaping connection, about intergenerational understanding, and about how the younger, entry-level workforce generation might perceive what a personal brand is versus your, senior leadership / founder generation. I think it all pulls from the same toolbox, but there's different perspectives, wisdom, and familiarity that you'll have with each. I think younger generations is going to have platform fluency, technological agility, ease of media use, and ease to pick up and put down media and comms tools pretty quickly. Your older generation, however, is going to have seasoned wisdom and perspective. They're going to know people. You'll understand a flash bang from a sea change. There's a lot of benefits to both ends of the generational spectrum, learning from each other and how the personal brand gets applied. And in fact, I have a great idea for anyone that wants to do this. I have yet to have anybody in my network take on this challenge. I want to have the oldest person and the youngest person at your organization interview each other. And for years, I have yet to have this happen. So if you can do this, man, knock yourself out. It's a free Jon Barnes idea, but pick 5 questions that would be really interesting and have the oldest and youngest person at your organization interview each other on some video for 3 minutes. It could be a series. It could be strategically selected. It could be in triangulation to an upcoming change or announcement. But I think there's so much great generational dialogue that gets lost in the discussion on like technology and platforms and virtual and remote. And it's just like, those are all containers. The real connect between generations. It's a great opportunity right now as things are just wild, wacky, and turbulent. I'd love for someone hearing this presentation to take that on and have the oldest and youngest person in an appropriate and HR relevant way without disclosing ages, interview each other in some capacity. I think would be just awesome. So if any of that's helpful, it's just some other things rolling around in my head that I think would be just really cool to get out there to focus on the tether between generational complements in the workforce. I think it'd just be really cool.
That's great. A great challenge. So it's been wonderful in talking to you, Jon. I mean, this has been such a great topic. I think it applies to everyone. I mean, I know we've been talking about this from leaders, but would you agree that everybody deserves a brand and needs a brand?
I think everyone already has a brand. The question is, will you own it? Will you use it? Or will you just let it be and let it happen to you? You've got to make it happen. You can't let it happen to you. Everybody's got a brand. So hashtag time to own it. I just made that up.
Spoken like a true father. I mean, I'm going to tell my son that right away. So thank you so much, Jon, for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Great
All
questions. Right. Thanks for everybody that chimed in as well.
All right. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful week. And we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.